Chapter 7. The Sweet Omelette. "You're idling by yourself again, Jiro," said Otami. "What makes you so sulky? Come and say hello to your father." It was near sunset. Jiro was loitering by himself in the garden. His father, Shunsuke, was sitting at the veranda of the drawing room as he sipped rice wine. Otami was fanning him with a hand fan at his side. Kyoichi and Shunzo were also there with them. Shunsuke seemed to Jiro to be a mysterious person. He was a petty clerk for a town office about 10 kilometers away and came home only for Saturdays and Sundays. Jiro had rarely seen him while he had been put out with the nurse, to say nothing of having a chance to talk to him. In due time, however, Jiro came to know his father little by little and thought that the looks of him were more familiar than those of any other member at his house. He looked much kinder than the nurse's husband, too. In fact, Jiro was glad that morning to hear about his father's coming home. "He'll be back this evening," said his mother. Jiro was eager to see him. When the evening drew near, all the family sprinkled water on the shrubs of the garden before they welcomed their father back home. Jiro also poured water on the stones and other things. However, when he was told that his father had just arrived, he felt a little awkward to go out to meet him. So he slipped into the garden in the midst of the fuss. Hiding himself in the bushes, he watched how his father took off his clothes and went for a bath. Otami brought the supper things to the veranda while his brothers were romping about her. Soon, however, Jiro lost interest in such a peeping. He concealed himself from a mere whim, but nobody seemed to pay any attention to his absence. Wasn't it out of place for him to show himself from among the bushes? So he decided to attract their attention by moving about in the garden as soon as Shunsuke started sipping rice wine. It was just at such a time when he was called by Otami. He wanted to go to his parents, but her tone sounded a little too stern for him to do so. He turned and leaned against the tree. "Father's back, Jiro-chan," said Kyoichi and Shunzo, but Jiro couldn't turn around, feeling their gaze at his back strongly. "That's his way once again," Otami complained with a sigh. "What shall I do? I'm at a loss how to treat him." "Probably he's a bit embarrassed," said Shunsuke. "I doubt that," said Otami. "He should be more obedient." "He's not accustomed to this house yet," he said. "I'm sure he will be soon." "But I have my doubts about that," she said again. "This house is like a new one to him," he said. "Maybe he still takes it for strangers." "Probably, but he's too obstinate," said Otami. "Maybe he was imprinted with some bad idea by Ohama." "No kidding," he said. "A boy of his age couldn't play a trick even if he was slyly persuaded." "Then is it his disposition?" she asked. "I don't think so," said Shunsuke. "It's a circumstances. Quite understandable, isn't it?" "Do you think it all right to leave him as he is?" she said with a worried look. "I don't think so, but we can't help it for the time being." "How carefree you are," she said. "I can't be so easygoing like you even for a moment." "That uneasiness of yours makes the matter all the worse." "Then what do you think I should do?" "In a word, you should avoid preaching to him." "But I can't leave him like that. When I think of his future, I can't be so carefree." "I don't think you should correct him so severely simply because you worry about his future." But such mean behavior, she said. It horrifies me. The other day he stuck his hand into the rice bin and ate directly from it. Anyway, we'd better shut our eyes to whatever he does for the time being, he said. Above all, I ask you not to treat him discriminately. You don't have to worry about that, said Otami. But there's no sense if you do that only seemingly. It is the heart that matters. What do you mean by the heart? She said. It's the parent's love, the natural love of a parent to your child. What are you talking about? Said Otami. It was I that bore him in pain. They say that even if it's one's own child, a mother can't feel very deep love toward him unless she feeds him at her own breast, don't they? It can't apply to me, said Otami. Probably it would be so with a woman of no education. I see. By the way, how is his grandmother treating him? Said Shunsuke. You already know that she was against calling him back home, she said. You could easily guess that, could you? Women act on sentiment alone. Do you think that I am the same as she? Probably you're a bit different from her, I think. A bit different? She protested. What a shame. You can't trust me at all, can you? Don't be so hot, he said. What if he overhears us? Well, why not call him again? How about calling him in your impartial voice? She said. Jiro was straining to overhear their conversation, but could hardly do so. Even if he did, he probably couldn't understand what they were talking about, but his father sounded to be talking in his favor. He secretly expected Shunsuke to call his name at any moment, but didn't. At last, he turned again to look at the veranda. It was already dark and he couldn't see very well, but his father was sipping rice wine silently, while his mother was fanning him nervously as she faced the other way. You bring Jiro to me, Kyoichi, said Shunsuke suddenly in a loud voice. Looking through the dark bushes uneasily, he rose to his feet and went up to Jiro. Father's calling you. Come, Jiro-chan, he said and took Jiro's wrist cautiously. It wasn't very comfortable to have his hand grasped like that, but he wasn't so bold as to resist his brother in his parents' presence. He followed Kyoichi in silence. Otami gave him a piercing look but said nothing. Not knowing where to sit down, Jiro stood behind the pillar of the veranda with his index finger in his mouth. Sit down here, Jiro, said Shunsuke, pointing to his dinner tray. His tone was blunt, but didn't hurt his feelings at all. Avoiding his mother's gaze, he edged slowly to the spot indicated by his father. Shunsuke, holding his cup, looked at his three sons. Jiro was the least good-looking of all. His eyes and mouth looked like a monkey, and his complexion was dark. Besides, a trace of dried snivel was seen aslant on his cheeks, making his face look funny. Shunsuke felt a deep pity for him. You've grown big, he said with a bright smile. As for physique, you're the best. I've no business tomorrow, so I'll take you to the river. I hope you can swim. Jiro didn't make any reply. He had never swum in the big river, though he sometimes tried it with a tub in a small pond near the school. Let me go, father, said Kyoichi. Me too, said Shunzo. They talked to their father with bright eyes in turn, but he didn't answer them. How do you like the idea, eh? Said Shunsuke to Jiro again. If you don't like to go, you don't have to. So, what do you like best? Tell me, and I'll do what you like with you." All the eyes were turned to him. Ever since he was brought back to his house, he had hated to be looked at by them, but didn't feel it that day. He looked around at his mother and his brothers and made an unstrained, drawn answer like a well-bred boy. "Well, but I can't swim, father." "There are shallows in that river," said Kyoichi. "We dig shells there." "That's true, father," said Shunzo. "Don't worry," said Shunsuke. "I'll teach you. You can learn it quickly." Otami remained silent, and Jiro felt a little uneasy about it, but answered without losing his calmness. "Then I'll go, father." It determined their plan for the next day. For the first time he felt himself at home like he did at Ohama's. Soon Shunsuke stopped drinking rice wine to have a light meal with a cup of tea. He stood up, put on his geta or wooden clogs, and walked around the garden bench, stretching his limbs. "Do you want to enjoy the evening cool a little more?" said Otami. "Yes, will you spread a mat on this bench?" he said. Otami went for the straw mat, Kyoichi and Shunzo running after her. Jiro was left alone on the veranda when a piece of omelette caught his eyes, left over in his father's dish. Sweet omelette! There was nothing so good to him. Jiro knew through his experience at Ohama's that you could have it on very special occasions. At this house, however, grandmother sometimes made one in her own room and gave it only to Kyoichi and Shunzo for a tidbit. That very day, when he met them in the corridor, they were munching on omelette. He made a great effort to pretend to be calm, but when he smelt the aroma coming from their mouths, he felt a burning anger toward grandmother who would discriminate him from his brothers with malice. He swore to himself not to step into her room on any account. Just in front of him was left a cold piece of that very omelette in his father's dish. Wasn't it too attractive to him? He stole a glance of the inner room. It would be a little while before his mother came out. Turning to Shunsuke, he saw him rambling about in the garden with his back to him. Jiro snatched it and took in his mouth. "Look," said Shunsuke abruptly. "It's a shooting star." How astonished he was! Shunsuke wasn't aware of his theft, but Jiro couldn't chew it very well. He murmured a strange voice instead of answering his father and bent over the veranda as if he were looking for his footwear. In the meantime, he was very busy masticating the sweet omelette. Jiro stood by his father as if nothing had happened. Tasting the remaining flavor in his mouth, he also looked up at the starlit sky with a serious-looking face. Soon Otami came back with a mat and spread it over the bench. Shunsuke lay on his side and fanned himself. Otami sat at the edge of it and said to Jiro, "You'd better go to bed with Kyoichi and Shunzo." But he looked unsatisfied with her words. "He doesn't feel sleepy," said Shunsuke. "It's not so late." "But they've already gone to bed," said Otami. "How early?" he said. "You can stay here a little while, Jiro." "What a pet you make of him," she said. "Well, sit here and be a nice boy, Jiro." Jiro sat at the edge of the bench hesitantly and lay on his side by his father. Then he became anxious to touch himself against the white fleshy body of his father's. Wriggling like a snake, He pushed his sweaty body to Shunsuke's round back. "You're all dirty. Get away!" Shunsuke exploded and sat up. By nature, he was a generous and merciful man, but had a unique trait of being very nervous, especially as to uncleanliness. For instance, if he put his hand on the tatami floor at a stranger's, he had to scrub his hand hard at home. "What has happened?" Otami asked calmly. "His sweaty body touched me," he said. "I was just surprised, that's all." He was steadily rubbing his side with the edge of his fan. Jiro was sad and looked up at his father lying on the bench. "You amaze me," said Otami coldly to her husband. "What do you mean? I wonder how you can say your own son is dirty," she said. "A dirty thing is dirty. And you have parental love for all that?" "Don't be stupid," he said. "This is quite a different problem. Don't you understand?" "You always confuse me like that," she says. "You show overflowing love to him for a time, and next moment treat him so cruelly as to distress him. Stop your silly logic. Isn't it you that are always giving a lame excuse? When did I give a lame excuse? Who said just a minute ago that the heart is more important than a formality? Is that a lame excuse, you say?" "Yes, of course," she said. "You're very inconsistent. You thunder at your own son when he comes close to you, don't you?" But I have no trick in mind." "Oh my, do you think I have a tricky mind?" "I'm not saying that of you, dear." Otami kept silent for a while, clenching her teeth, and said, "If you don't use tricks, can you say or do anything to your child?" "Yes, as long as you have true love in your heart. But your deep love isn't trustworthy at all." "Do you think so?" said Shunsuke. "But let us discuss it later. We'd better not continue such a dispute in his presence. It will only degrade our authority as parents." Otami gave a sharp look to Jiro in silence. "Well, I'd like to have a bath again before going to bed. Can I take the hot bath?" he said. "There's plenty of hot water there," said Otami bluntly. "I see," he said. "Come with me, Jiro. I'll wash you." Jiro was perplexed. It was Otami that protested against Shunsuke for him. For all that, Jiro felt no fondness for her. On the other hand, when he was scolded by Shunsuke, he felt discouraged, but as he heard their dispute, he thought that Shunsuke was warmer in heart than Otami. When he was told to follow his father for a bath, he was really perplexed, but at the same time was so glad. The moment he sat up, however, he got so tense, for Otami stepped onto the veranda and started clearing the tray away. That sweet omelette! Jiro was riveted on the garden bench. What should he do if his misbehavior was detected by her? "Dear me," Otami said and turned to Jiro with a suspicious look. He repented of what he had done, but pretended that he did not know anything. "You left one omelette, didn't you?" she said to Shunsuke. "Yes, I think so," he said. "What did you do with it?" "I did nothing with it." "Didn't you hand it to Jiro?" "No." "How strange it is," she said. "Never mind, isn't it a petty thing?" he said, and turned to Jiro with his head a little aslant. It's a serious problem," she said decisively, coming up to the bench. Jiro was standing rigidly. Grabbing his shoulders, Otami dragged him down to kneel on the bench. You, Jiro," said in gasp. The other day, didn't I teach you that much? And yet you've done it again. He had it in mind to confess his sin honestly to Otami, thinking that Shunsuke was close by. However, being blamed like that, Jiro felt like resisting her and turned his cold, fixed eyes to Otami. What cheek, she said in a trembling voice. Look at this determined face of his. Do you still say that I'd better leave him as he is? Shunsuke was watching the scene with an air of perplexity and said, I understand your feelings, Otami, but leave it to me tonight. Jiro, let us take a bath together. Come with me. Shunsuke took Jiro's hand and almost dragged him to the bathroom. He rubbed him all over in silence. Soon Jiro began sobbing. Weep no more, Jiro, said his father. Don't take anything when someone is absent, however hungry you are. You can eat as much as you like in this house. Don't be reserved, understand? If you want something, ask for it freely. I don't like a boy who can't ask for anything. Jiro nodded silently. That night he slept side by side with his father. He did not wet his bed, nor did he get a mosquito bite. He even rested his legs against his father's body, but wasn't shouted at. It was the first peaceful sleep he had since he came back to his house.